thank you for joining us. It's a really important topic, this, and it's therefore my pleasure to introduce our panel. To start with, we have Andreas Schleicher, who probably needs no introduction, and who is the Director of Education and Skills at the OECD. Nick Saw, who is the Executive Principal here at Harris Academy, St John's Wood in London, where we are just done a big event to show people the job opportunities open to them. Peter Cheese, who's the Chief Exec of CIPD, which represents nearly 170,000 people working in HR around the world. Kath Simimai, who is lead for talent and acquisitions for Amazon all around the world, apart from the US. I think responsible for something like 70,000 hires a year in 63 countries. And then Dr. Anthony Mann, who's the author of this report and whose work you may be familiar with. So I'm now going to hand, before I hand over, thank you for all the questions. This is an interactive session. So please, through the chat, please submit any questions you have. We've had a lot already, but we're going to have a lot more. We'll also be posting the link to the report and everything. So if you look at the chat, the report now is live. The dashboard should be live. This session is being recorded, so you'll also be able to catch up and watch it again. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick Saw. Nick Saw.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm Nick Saw. I'm the executive head teacher of 4 schools in North London. We teach about 5,000 children, and I'm part of a bigger trust of schools called the Harris Federation that teaches 45,000 children across all of London. And one of our mottos here is about dedication and destiny. And so that's really great that we can host the launch of this report here. And as Nick Chambers has just said, we've just had 200 children benefit from meeting volunteers from Amazon and various other employers who have talked about their journeys and their employability. So thank you to everyone on this call. I know you're going to learn a lot, and we're here to both answer your questions and explain what the report is about. So welcome everybody on the call to Harris Academy, St John's Wood in London. And let's go for a great webinar.
Thank you very much. Well, as I introduced Andreas Schleicher, I'd just like to say I think this is one of the most significant reports OECD have done in many, many years. So I'm really excited to be able to share the presentation that Andreas is going to do. So over to you, Andreas.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I'm really delighted that we launched this report in a school. Now, this is all about the future of young kids and how we can help them find their future and find their dreams. And we surveyed over 700,000 15-year-olds across the world as part of our PISA assessment on what they expect to do in their future and what difficulties they face and what support they obtain. And the report offers really encouraging insights that, effective career guidance does work. It leads to better outcomes in the long run when we actually study what happened to kids afterwards. The context is clear. While the world of work is ever more interesting these days, it's also ever more difficult for young people to navigate this rapidly changing, complex world of work. And we can see actually in many countries, you see that here on the slide, the share of young people facing difficulties to find employment is so much greater than for the average population. So whatever we can do to help them, get into the world of work is so important. We are launching the report, but we're also launching a really interesting dashboard that actually gives you, first-hand access to the underlying data. You can see, the top 10 occupational expectations of girls and boys. You can see how those expectations actually align what the world of work demands from people. You can see to what extent students participate in career development activities and also what they think about their careers. So I think a really interactive way you can do that for your own country, or you can do that in a comparative perspective, seeing how your country stack up on that. But let's get into the report. What the first, almost quite troubling finding is that career uncertainty has risen among 15-year-olds. You know, when you look at those 15-year-olds who do not know what they want to do when they are 30 who do not tell us, you can see a sharp rise since 2006. And that is something that we should take serious. You know, when you see about, you know, it's not that necessarily, you know, when you are 15, you need to know exactly what you're going to do when you are 30, but you should be thinking about that question. If you do not have, you know, a view of your future, you're unlikely to invest the effort and energy it takes to realize that future. And that growth in career uncertainty is something that should worry us. When you ask, you know, 15-year-olds who do know the answer, what they want to do, you can see that their occupational expectations are highly concentrated. There's a kind of very few occupations, and actually very traditional ones, that most young people aspire to. Around half of girls and boys with a job plan to expect to work in just 10 jobs. And what we also see when you look at the numbers is that this kind of concentration of job expectations has grown since 2000. And that's interesting. You know, on the one hand, you can say the jobs that are actually out there are diversifying. You know, we never had as many different kind of career possibilities, but the, you know, expectations of people has become more narrow, often dominated by the media, what you see in the media rather than what is existing in the real world. And some countries, especially non-OECD countries, more than 70% of students say they will work in one of those 10 jobs. If you look at them, you know, for girls, it's to become a doctor, to become a teacher or a lawyer. For boys, it's to work in technology, to work in sports, or to become an engineer. Doctors and teachers also come, you know, quite high on the list. So that's basically what we see, a narrowing field of choices in a widening range of the real world. One of the big trends that we have seen since 2000 is that students increasingly expect to work as a professional, kind of white-collar job, main group in the International Standard Classification of Occupations. That interest has grown from 47% to 58% between 2000 and 22. And you can say, well, it's not a bad thing, you know, to aim for becoming a professional. But when you look at these figures, you can already imagine that that is well beyond the actual supply of those kinds of jobs. And you can see that here for the case of England and Norway. Now, you can see in England, student expectations to work as a professional are 3 times greater than actual labor demand in this field. And in Norway, the figure is less than is still sort of twice as much. Now, again, you know, I don't think it's a bad thing for young people to aspire to work as a professional. But then, you know, your education, your investment in your future needs to align with this. And this is where, you know, the trouble starts. When we actually looked at this alignment, you know, we can see there is a significant share of young people who want to become a professional or who want to work in a job that requires a tertiary education, but who actually do not intend to study beyond secondary school. So you can see their expectations in the labor market are not aligned with their educational choices. And you can see the figure here for students from disadvantaged backgrounds really, really high. Now, you can see in some countries it's getting, you know, above, you know, a half of the 15-year-olds. And longitudinal data tell us that that is a problem. Now, if you control for other characteristics, students who are misaligned in their expectations do worse in the early labor market than what you would have expected given their academic success, social background, and other characteristics. So misalignment is a clear predictor for a less successful transition into the labor market. And this is among the disadvantaged. When you actually look at students from privileged background, the problem is a lot smaller. So we can say, actually, you know, we need to redouble our efforts to help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, you know, either, you know, ratchet up their educational, you know, investment, or actually improve their alignment with labor market demand. So if you look at this in more detail, you can see that actually there is a very substantial difference in educational ambitions. Now, you can see here disadvantaged high performers versus advantaged high performers. All of the students you see on this chart are doing really, really well on the PISA test. They're bright students. They get high test scores. But you can see those with high test scores who come from privileged backgrounds all want to go on to, tertiary education. They know they need that for their future. They know they want to have that investment. Whereas for disadvantaged high performers, you can see they do not see that future for them. They're not going on to higher education, even if they have the potential for doing that. And even more extreme, when you look at high performers who are disadvantaged versus low performers who are privileged, you can see among low performers who are coming from privileged backgrounds, their educational aspirations are higher than for bright students from disadvantaged families. That is clearly a sign that, we're not doing as good a job as we can to guide young people to fulfill their potential. And you could see before, if you do not fulfill that educational potential, you're unlikely to end up in the kind of career that young people aspire to. That's, I think, the picture that we see. What can we do about it? And this is really where career guidance comes in. We have data from 70 countries here where they ask students to what extent they participated in career guidance activity. And here you look at participation rates in 2018 and 22. So we can see how those patterns have changed. Now, generally, we can see a slight rise in participation levels. That's, I think, the good part of the news. But, if you look at this more careful, you can see just about half of the students have spoken to a career advisor in their school. The other half has not done that. And other things. Searching the internet is more common, and perhaps, we can do a lot more to give young people better access through technology to careers. In fact, the OECD has developed a really interesting side of career guidance systems that are digital. Back there, you can clearly see that is what young people do, so we can give them better tools. But, we also know from research that it's often the on-site participation, meeting real people in real jobs, making mistakes that have real consequences. Doing an internship is very, very important. Attending job shadowing, visiting a job fair, and you can see those numbers are not that high. There is a lot that we can do to give young people a better kind of perspective on the job. Making school more like your world, making the world more like your school than just, the school, the limits of your work. And when you actually break that down by countries, the share of students visiting a job fair, you can see there's a lot of variability across countries. Here on the right side, you can see countries, Switzerland, Denmark, Norway, where that is quite common. You can see a good, majority of students have actually that first-hand experience through a job fair. And whereas in other countries on the left side, it is true, it's really rare. And again, from longitudinal studies, we know that engaging directly with people in work gives young people authentic insights into different occupational areas, and in a way that is, authentic and trustworthy for them, which is really important. Again, you cannot be what you cannot see. And we have, this is for job fairs. You can look at the same thing for internships. Once again, we see that one of the forms of career development that can be most reliably linked with better long-term employment is actually the time that you have spent in a workplace, completing tasks under, the supervision, obviously, for quite some time, not just, looking at it once, but doing things. And that is exactly what happens when students do volunteering, or when they work on a part-time basis, or when they undertake an internship. And again, you can see, in Germany, in Denmark, in France, that's really well developed. You have a good majority, 2/3 or more of kids doing that. But at the same time, in other countries on the left side, there is so much more that we could be doing around that. The question I raised before is, are we getting that advice to the people who need it most? Remember the misalignment of career expectations, particularly among disadvantaged. But when you compare that disadvantaged versus privileged, 15-year-olds, you can see actually there is not much of a difference. We don't currently make enough effort to target our best career guidance to the people who need it most, and to give those people who do not see a bright future for them, or a future that is sufficiently different from the environment in which they live, the opportunities to do so. There's a lot more that could be done to do that. Final point, on the question of equity, we can use the PISA data also to track changes in student interest in jobs, across the labor market. In this figure, you see the occupational expectations that relate to 4 vocational fields that have often been identified as being of strategic importance in our countries. And in 2 fields, student interest overall has remained largely the same over the last 20 years. The skilled trades, crafts, and technology. Think about technology, huge rises in demand, but supply or interest is flat. In healthcare, interest has increased, but that's just not because girls have now a greater expectancy in that. In teaching, student interest has declined quite markedly, and it's the only field where we are seeing a closing of the gender gap, but just again, because interest among girls is reducing. So rapidly changing world of work. But if you look at these data, you don't see much of a change in the career interests and expectations. And that really shows that often we educate our people, the young people, for our past rather than, for their future. And again, the publication and also the dashboard highlight the concerns about the global state of teenage career preparation. And when you look at this chart, you can see about half of young people actually worry that school has not prepared them for life. Again, I think you need to learn a lot of things in school that may not have immediate utility in your life. But, if young people perceive the entire schooling experience isn't, getting them ready, I think we need to do something about that. And the PISA data shows that, once again, that the future plans of young people are uncertain. They are confused. They are highly concentrated in very traditional fields. And we see that, strong relationship with gender and social background. All of that matters. That's exactly what longitudinal data tell us, that, the kind of vision that young people have about their careers actually plays out in the choices they make and in the jobs that they eventually get. The answer to that is also very clear. We can see, being able to connect what you learn with your work, with the future work, is really the answer to this. It markedly improves labor market transition. So this isn't rocket science. This is actually something that can be quite easily done. And we have actually good examples for this. Technology can be a great amplifier of this. We can connect people in the world of work with schools through digital platforms. They are great examples for this. And I'm just highlighting here the Inspiring the Futures campaign here in Britain. It's an amazing example, just drawing out the potential in a population, asking people who are willing to volunteer to donate their time to help young people in school understand the world of work. It allows schools to pick, what they're interested in and connect it, and then, get that experience right where it's needed among young people. So thank you for your attention, and please have a look at both the publication and the dashboard. And my special thanks here again to Education Employers and Amazon, which has enabled us to produce this report. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I mean, what a rich data set. When I started off, I said this really was probably a landmark report, a very significant report. I think, having seen this now, I hope you'll agree. This idea that young people are more uncertain than ever. There's been little change in the jobs they aspire to over the last 25 years. That whilst jobs have changed amazingly in the last 20 years, actually kids' aspirations have narrowed. I mean, how can that be? And that social background is still the biggest determinant of your academic success rather than your ability. Well, that can't be right. What's the result of this? Well, in lots of countries, record numbers of NEETs, record numbers of employers not being able to find people with the skills. So, this is a real wake-up call. There's something that is actually wrong in the system and we need to make it better. So on that note, I'm going to hand over initially to my panelists to give their initial reaction, and then I'm going to all your questions. I'm going to start with Kath.
Thanks, Nick. And thanks, Andreas, and the OECD for the report. I mean, I suppose depressingly, it's not surprising. It's not surprising, but it is a real wake-up call that we need to do more collectively as governments and as employers and the education sector working more closely together. The thing you said that stood out the most for me and really resonated, and it will be going on my LinkedIn comment about this later, is we are educating our young people for our pasts, not for their future. And that is, that's a really stark fact, which we need to do more on. Amazon, we're trying very hard. We believe very strongly that we have a responsibility as one of the largest global employers to really work in really close partnership with education internationally to try and help children understand the careers that are available to them and how they navigate to them. And just to give you a kind of flavor for some of the resources that are available, I'd encourage you to Google Amazon for Schools. And I can talk a little bit about, I'll give 2 examples, the UK and India, just to give a flavour of some of the things we're doing. And last year in the UK, we reached, our programme Amazon Future Engineer reached 772,000 students with at least 45 minutes of content. And that has been targeted primarily at 14 to 18-year-olds more recently. But we are pivoting very hard to try and really focus on the 8 to 14-year-olds this year and beyond. To your point, Andreas, kids make decisions really early about what they think they can be or they think they can't be. And so we need to make sure that the children from a really young age believe that careers are accessible to them. And we do that sorry, Nick, apologies. And just to say, we're doing that primarily through career chats, which are virtual and available online, so really easy to access for anybody at any time, and also virtual career tours. So again, giving you an experience of what it looks like and feels like within a work environment. Sorry, I'll shut up now. Thanks.
No, so, Kath, you've got so much rich content to go through, and it's fantastic. You've got some volunteers in just behind me. I'm actually in a school staff room at the moment talking to kids here. Peter Cheese, please.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Andreas. Just to give a bit of context for my comments, I work with the HR profession. And the HR profession in organizations is very much about how we attract, retain, develop people in organizations everywhere. I think some of the questions I can already see coming up, and why is there this gap and this uncertainty that young people have? And it is in part, of course, very much related to the nature of jobs and how quickly they are changing. We can clearly see, particularly now with the rapid developments in artificial intelligence, that many jobs will change. Now, what does that mean for young people? Well, first of all, what does it mean for employers? One of the key things it means for employers is we are going to have to continue and increase our investment in building skills in our own organizations as those jobs change. Secondly, when we look, and many employers are already doing this, when they look at recruiting young people, we recognize you're not going to have all of the job skills. That should be the employer helping to develop those job skills. But it is much more of a focus now on what some people might call the soft skills. So your ability to communicate, to collaborate and work in teams, to think critically, which is really important in a world which is changing so fast, and to be curious. Because if the world is changing fast, then it's going to be important for all of us to be curious about opportunities, to seek those opportunities, to seek guidance from others. So those sorts of what are sometimes called employability or essential skills are things that it is really important that you understand, both through what you are doing in your formal education, but also many young people develop these skills in other aspects of their lives. You might be a captain in a football team, or you might be working with your parents in their business, and all these different ways through your life that you develop some of those skills. And then as you come to talk to employers, you can then articulate those kind of skills, which are every bit as important to an employer as any other skill that you will see. Now, one other area which is really important related to the idea that jobs are changing so rapidly is some understanding of the digital world. And we all need to do this, including me. I mean, one of the debates, of course, is about the adult workforce and about upskilling them as well. But for people entering the workforce, this will be another question that you're going to get asked more and more. How much do you understand some of the digital tools and how do you use them? Over the last couple of years, many of you will have started to use these generative AI tools, which are enormously powerful. But we have to understand how to use those things responsibly. They won't always come up with the right answer. You've got to be curious. You've got to think critically. And as I said, it'd be those kind of skills that increasingly employers are looking for. So I would offer that encouragement to you. And one other point that I would make in all of this, whilst you've heard a lot of talk about, well, what's my career going to be? Careers are not the same as they were when I first started work quite a number of years ago. They are, people talk about a squiggly career now. In other words, that I will probably be doing many different jobs in my career. So the first job that you do may or may not be the thing you end up doing in the longer term. So I want to offer that as encouragement as well. Get into something that you're interested in, helps you learn and develop, and then keep that sort of mindset alive as you develop and navigate your career in the future.
Thanks, Peter. That was so insightful. And you've been such a supporter of going into schools yourself, and we're talking to some young people. I'm going to come to you, Nick Saw, your sort of observations on the report, you know, for what it means practically for your students. Andreas was talking to some of the students today. Give us your observations, if you will, please.
Again, I hope you can hear me. And I think your own analysis that in many ways this report shows that nothing has changed. And I think we in Harris Federation and myself, my passion for schools is that we work for those children who in a sense can't help themselves, and that we're working in schools where over half the children have some form of welfare support and free school meals. And it is those children for whom this is most frightening for, because, and most depressing for. What we try to do in our school is to make sure that the students have many encounters with employers, but also I think you've just talked there, Peter, about critical thinking. What is difficult, I think, in developing critical thinking is you can't do critical thinking education in an independent way. It's quite domain specific for different fields of knowledge. And in the past, what people from deprived backgrounds have not had is the academic curriculum that children in, say, independent schools or grammar schools in selective schools in the UK. And so schools like ours in inner city London, we're trying to make sure that they get that sort of academic curriculum that gives them the knowledge that allows them to develop those critical thinking skills, those collaborative learning experiences. So I think one of the things that struck me about what Kath spoke of as well is that those encounters with employers and the work experience and the mentoring processes, some companies, somebody mentioned it in the chat, some companies are very good at that. Amazon is one, Snapchat is another, Capgemini, a sort of French computer firm, excellent at that. But it's not a structural thing. And I think the only way in which you can, as a school, as a system set up change, is if we have big government helping to change this, because otherwise schools in their own sort of selfish ways are just linking with whomever is helpful, but it's a postcode lottery then for students.
Good, thank you, and thanks for all those people who are posting more comments and questions in the chat. Please do continue to keep posting. We will either come back to you on this call, there are huge numbers, or we'll try and get back to you later. And I'm going to hand on to Anthony Mann, who's the author of this report, and also wrote a very landmark report back in 2011, showing that actually the more encounters young people had with the world of work, the less likely were to be neat. It got called a 4 or more report. It never really was a 4 or more report, but it's actually influenced policy all over the world. So Anthony, I'd like to hand over to you now, and then we'll take more questions.
Well, thanks, Nick. I just want to, I suppose, seeing a bit more positive response. I mean, in setting out these numbers, we kind of say this is the problem. You know, when we have better data than ever before, from more countries ever before, better high quality data to show that we really do have a problem. And the problem is that, you know, when we look at the kind of the career aspirations and we kind of look at the expectations of young people, we do see these these problems. But fundamentally, career guidance, career development does work, and we know that now more confidently than ever, because over the last 5 years we spent an awful lot of time and money researching the best scientific evidence to see whether we could see positive labour market outcomes later on, typically around the age of 25. You know, are people, young people more likely to be in work? If they're in work, are they earning more? Are they happy with what's happening? And we can link those to forms of career development, which they did around the age of 15. And we can see these strong connections after we've controlled for their qualifications, their social backgrounds, and so on. And so we can see this. And but what we're finding is that young people aren't getting enough. They're just not getting enough. When we look at some of those tables and look at the dashboard, look at it in this report, half of students across the OECD have spoken to a guidance counsellor by the age of 15. And if we look particularly at these areas around employer engagement, they're so important for young people because there they get to have authentic new insights into what possible lives may lay ahead of them and the things they need to do in order to be able to progress towards them. And we really need to think about massifying that approach. And when we looked at, Andreas showed you that chart, the things which young people do less of, the career fair, the job shadowing, the internship, the direct encounters from the world of work, are some of the small, some of the are less likely for young people. And so we're not doing enough of it. We aren't starting early enough, and we aren't focusing particularly on these key areas. And as Andreas showed very clearly in this data, there's a particular social issue in all of this, that young people now are particularly focused around professional pathways. Well, if you're not the child of a professional, you don't know them in your social network, and it's not particularly connected to you, it's much structurally more difficult for you. And so we need schools to be recognizing that some students need additional support and help and focusing some of the best guidance, at them, as I say, kind of from an early age. So guidance does work, but kids aren't getting enough of it, and we really need to massify the employer engagement within it.
I think, Anthony, it's really good to have that positive message because we now know where we are and we now know where we need to go. So this idea of scaling up, knowing what works and really taking it to the next level, I think that's so important. I know lots and lots of questions are going to come in. I'm going to try and summarize some of them. One particular question around AI. What are we doing to educate young people about careers in AI? Andreas, I'm going to come to you on this question.
Yeah, I think we can, leverage AI in two different ways. Obviously, AI is dramatically changing different job tasks, and familiarizing young people with this is incredibly important. AI is not going to replace humans, but humans good at using AI are going to replace people who struggle with the digital transition. And I think that's something where we can actually, do a lot in helping young people see that firsthand. But we can also leverage AI actually for the purpose of career guidance in amazing ways. Many of the career activities that we outline in this report are actually important, but very hard to scale. They require lots of people. And AI can help us design platforms where you can do virtual internships. In fact, our Odyssey kind of digital platform shows you lots of really interesting examples. Not all using AI yet, but some of them do. And I think AI is going to be a great enabler to help young people navigate the world, see the world, and actually get firsthand experience in some of those kind of job tests. So yeah, we need to educate for the world of AI, but also let's use AI to help young people better navigate this world.
Thank you. A question coming in from Mexico. How can we prevent the aspiration gap becoming another inequality gap? How can we prevent the aspirational gap from becoming another inequality gap? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Anthony pick that one up, or Andreas, or indeed anyone else. Someone must answer the question.
Andreas, why don't you go first?
I'll let Andreas said, go on.
I think this starts really, really early. Once the inequality gap is entrenched in educational experiences, it's very, very hard to redress it later on. So giving particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds, an understanding of the world and the possibilities they have. You could see in the chart that students from disadvantaged backgrounds, even if they do well on tests, even if they have learned everything in school that they need to, have poorer aspirations. And this is clearly something where we can do better signaling, giving young people a better understanding, what their kind of qualifications will enable them to do. So I think a lot has to do with signaling, and that's where the targeting of career experiences come in. One of the most devastating charts that I showed you is really that so far, we don't see much effort in school. Career guidance is sort of spread evenly across the young people, often, even voluntary. So reinforcing some of the social disparities, so starting early, making sure that we target our efforts and also, work against some of the role models and stereotypes. It is, if you grow up in a family, from a disadvantaged background, you may just not see the more privileged, advantaged jobs. And that's exactly where school can make such a difference, by bringing in, that experience in.
No, I think, certainly on the primary,
I think it's actually, and it's showing us that it's not that difficult to do.
Sorry, I think the connection dropped very briefly.
Yeah.
I think on primary, sorry, Peter, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment from the employer side. I mean, one of the things that we need to encourage employers to do is to be more open in all the different channels by which they source and recruit people. I can see in many countries, not least the United Kingdom, that for too long we've had too much emphasis, frankly, on just recruiting people with degrees, when there are so many jobs and so many different routes into work, such as apprenticeships. And going back to the point I made about core skills, it's not always about the academic qualification. And so if we're going to close that aspiration gap versus the opportunity gap, then that employers have got to play their part in that as well, and being much more inclusive in their recruitment practices. And I think we're seeing signs of that. As I said, I think we're seeing signs that organizations are being much more open to recruiting people on the basis of some of these core skills, recognizing they're going to have to build the job skills amongst their workforce, wherever they come from.
Can I come in on that, Nick?
Yeah, of course you can.
Actually, again, this is I suppose UK specific, but T-levels are a really exciting development, which is allowing employers to engage with 16 to 18-year-old age gap, which is a really nice, straightforward path into an apprenticeship and beyond, to your point, Peter. So allowing people to come into school, to education, identify a career they want to be involved with, and access it, education and proper real life experience with an employer before the age of 18. And obviously they're reasonably embryonic, but we're leaning very hard to them, and I know the government's pushing them very hard as well in the UK. So those kind of experiences and those kind of programs, I think we need to push harder. And to the point around inequality and inequity, really, really think about where we target those. And I'd like to see employers, and I know, and everyone does it, but they're stopping the work experience and the internships going to the sons and the daughters and the godchildren and the cousins and the nieces and the nephews, the people who are already in those organizations. If we have work experience opportunity, we have an internship, we should be giving it to someone who needs it, not to someone who already has the privilege.
In a second, I'm going to come back to Anthony Mann to talk about social capital, but I think it's those advantages and disadvantages, and I think that's what schools like Nick's here really tries to change. That it's not just who you know, it's how you get on. Andreas, I'm going to come back to your point, particularly on primary. As you know, the research we've done through Drawing the Future around the world for the last 10 years has really showed that kids' aspirations are very gender neutral. They have nothing in common with the labour market. They're actually very similar to 17-year-olds, and they're very much based on what they see around them. Anthony, can you just maybe pick up on Kath's comment there about, which is largely around social capital?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a theme of what we've been talking about how we can have a more equitable guidance system for all, really. And I think it's really helpful for us to think about what happens to somebody at the end of the whole of this process. So, they've been through their education system and they're in the competition for work. And we know from our studies of OECD data on adults that if you look at certain professions, particularly some of the most attractive professions, which we're focusing on a little bit here, that if you look at students with similar qualifications, it's those from more advantaged social backgrounds are more likely to end up in those jobs. And that's because it's not just about the qualification. If you look at the way that people recruit, and Kath and Peter, you can vouch me here or not as B, but it's not just about the qualification, it's about the experience, it's about the right qualifications, sometimes from the right places, but it's also about the social capital, and the social capital can be recommendations. It can be the references that you have. It can also be the advice that you get about opportunities which emerge, about you're well suited for that or not. And it's the third area, which is more amorphous, which is around cultural capital. It's understanding how systems work. It's understanding the rules of the game in different areas. It's understanding how to fit in, to be personally confident in those areas. And that's processes which can begin, so like in education, in the safe place of education, of allowing young people to understand these different rules of the game, to gain the relevant experience, to understand the pathways which employers particularly value, to understanding what they value in new recruits in those areas, to be able to understand the presentation, the likely expectations of being in those areas. So if we think about the end of the game, then that's, I think, really helpful to us, and that's something which we don't always do.
There's a very good paper called which Anthony wrote, called "It's Who You Meet." I think, I don't know if anyone can find that and Google it and post it online. Equally, the Drawing the Future of the Primary thing, wants to sort of put a link in the chat. I'm trying to deal with all these questions come from everywhere and be fair to everyone. A comment that's come up quite a lot is the influence of social media. How much is social media influencing children's aspirations? Nick, I'm going to start with you.
Well, a lot, I would say, and both negatively and positively. Schools are dealing with children accessing social media in ways in which we're dealing with their problems and their insecurities that grow up. Most schools in England now are either have or introduce some form of mobile phone technology ban in schools. Partly because we're trying to ensure that children, and particularly young girls and teenage girls, haven't got body image issues and negative things going on late at night on chat rooms and so on. So I think there's a social media element that can damage self-esteem, and that's really detrimental. And we have to do a lot of work with young people, growing that self-esteem, and that particularly the self-esteem around their academics and their sense of qualifications, and their sense, as we've heard today, about how they interact with people, that they do have a place there. I think the positive side of social media is that children now are, accessing information about universities and jobs in a way they never could before. And lots of platforms that we use in schools allow them to have online work experience, very much a secondary benefit, but there are lots of engagements online with employers now where they can have whole day sessions with different people in employment. So I think the social aspect, the networking aspect, is much more democratic now than it used to be, and social media is part of that.
Thank you. Another question coming in.
I think
Yes.
I think that Nick makes a really important point. I think you can get access to a much wider range of information, but we also see that the jobs that you see through social media and in the internet are not the jobs that exist in the real world. There's a big distortion going on, and you can see that actually in the responses from young people. That actually, I think we need to ensure that that is somehow balanced, and this is exactly where schools can play a really important role to give young people a more realistic appreciation of the jobs that actually exist.
Thank you. Quite a few questions grouping them together around the role of teachers. I was a former teacher. I used to teach design technology. I used to get people in to my school to show children what was possible. So I really there in teachers a key role in helping young people. So I'll throw a question out to a few people here about the role of teachers. What can we do to support our teachers? Andreas.
Now we have the bell.
School bell. We are genuinely in a school. Genuinely in a school.
Reminds us who we are working for, so that's a good thing. And yeah, absolutely, I think teachers are very, very central as role models themselves. At the very same time, I think also teachers can probably help students best by linking them to resources other than teachers, by building the connections and making sure that students have that first-hand experience by becoming good coaches, good mentors, great facilitators of those kinds of processes. But clearly teachers themselves need support, need to get good resources for that. The job market is changing rapidly, and keeping up with this is never easy. But I think there's a lot that, and you can see good schools are doing exactly that. Teachers in great schools are doing exactly that.
Okay, a more general question, maybe for Anthony. Which countries are doing best? That's a very simple question, but maybe talk about some of the differences of some of the countries where we're seeing innovative practice, maybe not. That's probably
Yeah,
more.
no, we get this question.
It's a sort of
lot.
journalist. It's a sort of journalist question. Of course, no real answer to that, but
Well, we do.
where they're doing it.
And what we tend to do is pick out certain things in certain countries. Generally, as often in education, Scandinavians do very well. And in this field, we have some very interesting work in Finland, in Denmark, and Norway. But it's not just there. But I will pick out an example from Denmark, which I like particularly. And so, kind of a work experience program is something which many school systems have. But in Denmark, what you do between the ages of about 13 and 16, in the first year, you might spend a day or two, more like job shadowing in a workplace. A second year, you'll spend a week, and that time you'll start doing tasks and supervision. But you get a third go at this the following year, because you may want to look at something else, or you may even confirm your choice, and you may be more confident. And I really like that staggered approach. The idea about job shadowing is very interesting. It's something which I think many more countries should do. In Germany, they have boys' days and girls' days, and the whole point of that is, if you are interested in going and exploring a job where your gender is not very well represented within it, where construction for girls, nursing for boys, you have a day where employers make these job shadowing opportunities available, and you go in there and you have a look. And I think that's really important, because people need to be able to see for themselves if it's right for themselves, if it will be a good environment or not. And then I'll give you one last example. There's this new program in Australia, which is called Little Ripples, where they actively provide parents with resources to help young people not make career decisions at 4 or 5 or 6, but to begin that thinking about how what they're doing in school might relate to somebody who they might become later on, and to broaden some of their ideas and thinkings, because we've got a lot of stereotypical ideas about what's right for somebody like me to do, begin from a young age. And we need to start that critical conversation amongst young people, that curious conversation from an early age.
Anthony, picking on that, I mean, at that early age and some of the research we've done, it is about that motivation. It's around that aspiration. It's showing children the relevance of what they're doing. It's exciting them about learning. It's not really about careers, but it's showing them the world, and a much broader world than they may be familiar with. Now, back to 15-year-olds. So a question probably to all of us, or all of you, actually. What advice would you give to an ambitious 15-year-old who wants to future-proof their career?
I can go with that one.
Yep.
I've just actually talked to a room full of ambitious 15-year-olds at a school in North London, and the range of careers that they're interested in doing. There goes that bell again. Biomedicine, aeronautical engineering, radiology, dermatology, psychiatry. So yeah, definitely a range of a group of really ambitious 15-year-olds. And some of the advice I was giving them actually was, the first point I said to them was being really, really open to change. And that change is inevitable, and change will always happen throughout your career. And if you can be someone who is curious, enthusiastic, willing to change, then your employers will value you and you will go far. And that starts from right now all the way through career. And the other big piece I said was work on the network. And we kind of talked about that in Social Capital. And I do think networking is more democratized than ever, thanks to platforms like LinkedIn. And I was encouraging them, even when you're 15 years old, build a LinkedIn profile, start thinking about organizations you're interested in, look at who works there, message them. You might have to send 50 messages to get 2 people who are willing to have a 10-minute chat with you virtually, but that will be worth it. And it doesn't matter how, what's the worst that can happen? They'll say no, but someone will say yes, and someone will help you and give you some advice. So open to change, curiosity, and working on the network. It's one of those things, and even I say this to my team today, networking is one of those things that is important but not urgent, and therefore it doesn't get done. But it is possibly the most critical thing you can do for your career.
Thanks, Peter. Same question.
I'd absolutely agree with what Kath said. Yes, absolutely. Network. This is such a core skill. It's a life skill. I mean, the interesting thing when we talk about these kind of essential skills now, these are life skills. I would say the same thing to somebody in their mid-career about continuing to be curious, continue to develop your network, make sure you have presence on social media through things like LinkedIn, as Kath said, and reach out to people. I mean, I think generally speaking, most people do want to help. I think most of us as a generation in work recognize that the world of work is much more complex, harder to navigate, and we do want to help. So reach out and ask. whether it be through people in work circumstances or through family connections, whatever it might be. And also, of course, go learn stuff off the internet, as Will said. There are an incredible amount of knowledge there, and you can ask these tools like ChatGPT or whatever, and there are other tools like them, questions about careers and jobs and opportunities. So just keep feeding that sense of curiosity, and I think you'll be fine.
Good. Just on the OECD team, I mean, do please check out the dashboards that Anthony and his team have done. They're interactive. You can go on, you can look at all the data. There are lots of lovely colors, lots of lovely bar charts, but you can also look at your country and compare and contrast. You compare what's happening in your country with what's happening in other countries. It's a really powerful data set. And also the report now is live. Obviously, you've seen the headlines, but there's an awful lot of stuff behind that. So I really would encourage you to look at that report and also to share it with colleagues, try and get the word out there and show, because I say it's been probably 2 years putting this report together from the OECD. So I would really encourage you to share it with as many people as you can. We nearly come to the end. A question now about a young person who wants to choose a particular career, but their parents are adamant they're going to stick to a traditional job and a job that one of their parents does. What advice would you give them? Mr. Saw. Sorry to throw the difficult questions at you. Or indeed anyone else to answer that question.
I'll be quick because I haven't got long. I mean, you're your own person, and in the schools I run, we have that pressure all the time where there's a pressure to do STEM subjects, or there isn't children want to do art or dance or film. I think Andreas talked about it at the beginning. They need to be encouraged to follow their dream, as long as their dream is realizable. Many young boys and girls want to be the next David Beckham, and it isn't always possible. It's got to be a realizable dream. But I think we support students, and that is the role of school, to identify their dream and do the things that are necessary to get there. And the parents' wishes are, in my view, immaterial.
I would just add a thought to this. When I go talk to schools, I'm so often asked not just to talk to the students about the future of work, but indeed to the teachers. And we were talking about what teachers need to know. Teachers need to be curious as well about the future of work and what they're educating their pupils for, but also the parents. Because part of the challenge, I think, is being acknowledged by the question, is not all the parents understand this changing world of work. And there are many cultures where, of course, these traditional, being a doctor, being an accountant, are the dominant professions. And to some extent, that's why some of the data that's shown up, that Andreas has talked about, why it shows up in the way that it does. So frankly, we also have to educate parents. And I would really encourage you at schools to say, when you're having careers advice and talks, and when you're bringing employers to the outside, bring the parents in as well. Help them understand what these different jobs and opportunities are, because they have not experienced a lot of this themselves, and parents are a very important force in helping guide young people as well. And the final point about them is also that we see in many countries, and again, not least the UK, that a lot of parents believe that the answer to the challenge of young people getting jobs is to go to university. And that's because many of them didn't necessarily go to university themselves, but there are these many other routes that we've talked about, apprenticeships, internships, all these things. And again, we need to help the wider adult population, parents, to understand these are routes which are very valid. You can learn as you earn, or earn as you learn, rather. And we need to help everybody understand these things, not just young people.
The final sort of question really on employers. What more, and you just touched on that a bit, Peter, what more could employers do of all sizes? Obviously we've got a lot of large companies on, but we've got sort of people who run their own small business. What more can employers do? Kath?
I would encourage every employer in countries where your platform is available, Nick, Inspiring the Futures, to encourage their employees to volunteer to talk to schools about their jobs. I would encourage employers to think about how you can make digital resources available, really easily available, to help careers teachers out, and parents actually out. It's the technology available to us today. It doesn't have to be a labor intensive, lots and lots of people activity. It really doesn't. We can really leverage the tech that's available to us to showcase the workplaces we have, the kinds of jobs we do, talk about how we use AI in our jobs, for example, to answer an earlier question around AI, all of that. We can definitely use technology to facilitate it at scale.
Fantastic. And thanks here to Peter. I know you've been encouraging all your members to volunteer in our year through Inspiring Researchers. Thanks. I'm going to come on to Anthony, and I'm going to end it with Andreas. Anthony, last comments as we wrap up.
I think a final comment here is we need to recognise that there's a lot of anxiety, kind of amongst young people as well amongst parents about the future. There's a lot of media about the way that everything is changing. And we also know that, some jobs have become more precarious than there was the case in the past. And we're going to know that work itself can be hugely enriching and a rewarding part of work, but also can be, destroy the soul like few other things, if you're in the wrong place. And so we really need to encourage young people, their parents in schools, to help them to do the homework, to check things out for themselves, to talk to people, to understand what these, different options are available and what they might be and what suits a young person well. Because ultimately, what we want for all young people is to help them to progress towards a future life and working, which is personally fulfilling for them as an individual.
Right, before I move on to Andreas, I think the thing about this report is we now have the data. Andreas, I think your comment is sort of we can't really make informed decisions without data. It's your strap line on your email. I can't remember. I'll come to you because you remind us what it is. But without data, it's very hard to make decisions. So now we have this biggest data set. We understand what's working really well, and there's some fantastic things by lots of organizations, many of them on the call today, who are day in, day out trying to make a difference. Some on a big scale, some on a small scale, doesn't really matter. People are doing their very best to help young people navigate the world and see what's out there. And I think we should celebrate that, because this report also shows that actually over the 20 years, education overall has improved for young people, particularly those from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. So it's always easy to look at the negative, but actually some really positive stuff there. Overall in education in the world, in terms of disadvantage, we are better than we were. So that's very encouraging. You've got the dashboards. We've got a way forward. Over to you, Andreas.
Yeah, we have the tools. I think that's great. We have the data. We know a lot about the aspirations of young people. I also think, I completely take the point, the parents sometimes can stand in the way because they represent the past when it comes to the world of work. But, if you can show as a young kid, that you are serious about it, you tried it out, you've experienced this, and those are the possibilities that young people have today as well. The challenges are bigger than they were in the past, but also the opportunities, the possibilities that young people have actually to explore, different careers, different ideas, and show, that they're ready for that. So I think we just need to connect the dots. I think we have, the data, we have the tools, we know what works in what context, and that's really important. And I think it's now about, activating the people in the right places. And I think it's very clear that, that's not something schools and education can do alone. The world of work is really absolutely central to this, and it needs to be kind of at the center, the work experience.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to end by thanking Andreas, inspiration as ever, Kath and Peter for that really incisive comments, Anthony for all the amazing work you've done on this report and others, Nick Saw for being a brilliant host, for organising a school visit, to getting all your young people here talking to adults about what they can do. Really inspirational at a time when we've got exams. It's a really busy time, and you've managed to do it seamlessly. So hats off to your staff. Really well done. And all those for joining us. I'm sorry we haven't got to all of your questions. Thanks to those, particularly in different time zones where it's either very late at night or very early in the morning. Thank you for joining us. Cheerio.